Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Katie Doris. I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Georgia-Alabama Land Trust. For those of you who aren't too familiar with the Land Trust, we are a nonprofit land conservation organization that primarily protects land across Georgia and Alabama, but we work in adjacent states as well. But we recently just hit a milestone of 500,000 acres protected, so we're really excited about that. And if you want to learn more about our protection work or events we have coming up, you can do that on our website or our social media. I'll drop links to that in the chat. But I also wanted to say a quick thank you to our corporate sponsors who help make our work and events possible. That includes Rayonier, PNC Bank, Georgia Power, and Thornhill Capital Management. A few housekeeping things before we get started. There will be time for questions at the end. So if you want to drop your questions in the chat as we go, I'll get to those at the end. And if you do want to ask your question out loud, you can click raise hand during that time and I can give you permission to speak. Also, the webinar is recorded today, so if you want to come back to any of the information presented, you can find that on our YouTube channel, and I will send out a link to everyone following the webinar. And I want to introduce our speaker. We have Mr. Rusty Wright joining us today. He is an associate professor and the extension specialist in fisheries at Auburn University. So thank you, Rusty, for sharing your time with us today and your expertise. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an honor to get to speak to you. This is the second time I've been able to speak to you a little bit. And in both cases, we spoke a little bit about pond management, and so that's what we're gonna focus on today. And we're really gonna focus on weed control. And the reason, I have some colleagues that take umbrage at the term weed because it's a little bit pejorative, but plant control and weed control in ponds is a critical part of managing ponds to be good fishing environments and recreational environments. And it's probably, as an extension specialist, the thing that I spend the most time on in terms of answering people's questions. Certainly fish issues, catchability, growth, those kinds of things are big issues. But if I had to pick one thing, it would be weed control. So, and there's a lot of reasons, and I hopefully will be able to point those out to you here in just a second. So let me share my screen here. And I did this just a minute ago. Why am I having trouble now? Okay. Well, that is interesting. Why? I'll try up here. Nope. Share. There we go. I got it. I got it.
Perfect.
Um, so I always like to um, uh, start with this picture for a very specific reason. This is an American lotus, and it's a beautiful plant. And so, is this a weed? If it's an ornamental, well, it becomes a weed when it gets out of control and causes us problems. So I always like to start out with something very attractive and say, okay, well, this certainly can be a weed depending on the nature. So let me get myself a pointer here as well. All right. Okay, just a little bit about me. Again, I am associate professor and extension specialist with Extension. I'm a cooperative extension here in Alabama at Auburn. I teach a couple of different courses in fisheries biology and pond management. So I teach the academic course in pond management. And then the extension interests include certainly a lot of pond work. So, and then my research expands. I've done work down in the marine environment all the way to up into small streams, ponds, of course, and other areas. Okay. Just to give you, if you need to get further information about all the things that we do in Extension and Alabama Extension, this is our website, www.asis.edu. And from there, if you search for ponds, you'll find all our pond management literature there, as well as other things that that should be helpful to you. Um, Also, if you want to take a second and scan this QR code, that will take you directly to the fisheries part of, and that's mostly pond management publications, many of which I created. So that QR code will take you directly to that link that's on the page. Okay, should have time to have scanned that. I'll move on. We also have a limited connection to the social media. We don't have a broad social media platform, but we do have a Facebook page, and that's this Alabama Extension Fisheries and Pond Management. And basically, I manage that, and I put up announcements of workshops and that kind of thing, as well as anything that I can see as of recent interest that I think would be of recent interest for people in this arena. Okay, so in general, so sort of some generalities about ponds. Why are we so interested in ponds? Well, you don't have to drive around through rural Georgia and Alabama much to see that ponds are everywhere, and they're used for a lot of different reasons, and we're going to show you some of those here in a second. In Alabama alone, there's about 250,000 small impoundments. Now, many of those are very small, and they might be just sediment retention ponds, but a lot are multi-use ponds for a lot of other reasons. And if you look across the Southeast, of course, there's a huge amount of ponds across the Southeast and across the United States as a whole, literally millions of ponds. And of course, these are man-made for the most part, and have really altered the landscape in a lot of ways in terms of providing water on the landscape that would not have been there, would not have been in terms of standing water, but it's changed environments. It's made water available to livestock, wildlife, even changed some of the local weather patterns in some areas in terms of temperature. So these ponds can have had a dramatic impact on our environment. So let's look at some of the pond uses quickly. And I've highlighted two up at the top. These are the most common uses of ponds in Alabama, and that's recreational fishing and stock watering. Recreational fishing, this is not to say that that's the only thing that the pond was designed for or built for, but nearly every pond is a multi-use pond. So you might build a pond to provide water for your livestock, but you're going to want to fish in that pond as well. You might provide an aesthetically pleasing pond in the backyard, but you want to fish in that pond as well. So recreational fishing is a commonality amongst a great number of ponds in the state, but there's all these other uses as well, even including, I highlighted here, firefighting. If you live in a rural area, pond and water from ponds can be provided for helping to fight fires and can lower insurance rates in those areas as well. Okay. Of course, I mentioned aesthetics, and it's true. I mean, sometimes ponds are built explicitly for aesthetics, like ornamental ponds that you see, like this one right here. But even if it's not built for aesthetics, if it's not built as an ornamental pond, we want the ponds to look good. And we want them to look good in your backyard. Certainly don't want to have odors. You don't want to have problems with that could be caused by weeds. So that's one of the reasons that we want to control weeds in the pond. So that brings us to what is a weed. I mentioned that not everyone considers those plants problematic, but if you're trying to use these ponds for certain things, these plants can get out of control and cause some problems. So basically, a weed is any critter, mostly plants, but plant algae, cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, or in fact, some weedy animals that can cause problems. And if it's doing something you don't want it to do, you can consider that a weed. And that's why we need to control it. Doesn't mean necessarily eliminate, but control it. So like I say, one person's flower is another person's noxious weed. Okay, so why do we want to control weeds? Well, there's all these various reasons, but if we think about the food web in the pond, and that nutrients fuel usually Usually algae and surface growing algae or planktonic algae. Those algae are eaten by small critters like zooplankton and filter feeding organisms. Those are eaten by small fishes, and the small fish are eaten by bigger fishes. And those are the ones lots of times that we're trying to fish for. So if you interrupt that by having vegetation absorb a lot of those nutrients, well, that's not efficient, and we don't really want that to happen. They can interfere with your ability to use the pond for recreation. Fishing can be a real problem in ponds with a lot of weeds. They interfere with bass feeding. If there's a lot of vegetation, bass won't be able to effectively eat the small fishes. When it becomes too much vegetation present, they can cause oxygen depletions. While plants create oxygen by photosynthesis, they also use oxygen. And when you get too much vegetation present at night when there's no sunlight, they can actually cause an oxygen depletion, or when they die and decompose. And then, of course, weeds can be unsightly and can cause odors and other aesthetic problems, particularly some of the algae. So that brings us to the control measures. And I number these intentionally because this is the way you should think about controlling vegetation. It's really, if those of you familiar with this process, especially those first three, you need to think of this as an integrated pest management approach. That is, you don't just do one thing and hope that that controls all your weeds. If you do this together, that will minimize your costs and your other problems that you might have in the pond. So we're going to start with prevention. So that's, if we can prevent a problem, that's much better than having to control it. And then that grades into biological control. And then herbicides is our third option, not our first option for vegetation control. If done correctly, we'll have to use less herbicides. And then there are some specialized situations where mechanical control, actually physically removing the weeds, can be somewhat effective, but it's limited. All right, let's start with prevention. So the first element of good prevention, weed prevention, is don't bring them in. I know that sounds kind of silly, like, well, why would I do that? Well, remember those ornamental plants. If you bring them in, they can get out of control. So if you do bring them in, understand that you're going to have extra management to keep them under control. This is a picture of a hybrid water lily. And again, very attractive plant, but it can get out of control. So the other thing that happens when you bring in plants is things can come with them. So it's not just the plants you're trying to get, but they can have other plants or algae attached to that plant that can get out, that can then be introduced to your pond. So again, be careful when you bring in plants. One of the main ways that weeds have been moved around, particularly the United States, but around the world really, is through ornamental ponds and aquaria. And we get these plants, we buy these plants because we want to have them in our ornamental settings. And then they may outgrow those systems. And unfortunately, people have often taken those plants then and put them in their ponds or put them in our public waterways. And that's never a good idea. So never transfer a plant or an animal that you've bought for your aquarium or your ornamental pond into our public waters. And I recommend not doing it into your ponds as either, because they can cause a lot of problems. So plants like hydrilla, that's one of the main ways that came into the state or into the United States. Water milfoils, some of the other really noxious weeds that we have to deal with that have cost billions of dollars to control. Kind of inadvertent introduction can occur through hitchhikers. And I mentioned that they can come in with plants, but here's how they've been moved around in our public reservoirs quite a bit, is by boats or by anglers moving between systems. So even if you're wading in a stream or whatever, make sure you clean off your boots and that kind of thing between streams and between going back to your home system. But this is one of the main concerns, and that is boats. So if you're using your boat in a public reservoir, especially one that has a bad weed problem like this one did with hydrilla, and or water milfoil. Uh, Understand that they can get hung up on the underside of your boat or your trailer, and then if you take that to your home pond, you're going to introduce that. So always clean anything that's been in a public reservoir well. Make sure it's dried before you move it into your home pond. Okay, some people want to intentionally add vegetation for plant cover. People like to fish. I enjoy fishing around things like water lilies. And so having some vegetation in the pond is maybe considered positive for some folks. And I would say up to about 20% coverage in especially our larger reservoirs has been found to be positive for fish production. So even in a small impoundment, 10 to 15, maybe 20% coverage around the edges of ponds could be positive for the pond. I'd say keep it under 20%, so 15, maybe 10% coverage. So basically, we're talking about small patches in the pond would be positive. Unfortunately, the problem is that those can go from 10 to 15% to 100%, apparently nearly 100% coverage seemingly overnight. It's not that fast, but it just, if you're not watching, you're not keeping it under control, it can get out of hand. I included these two plants on this page because if I'm picking a plant to add as fish cover, these would be the ones I would choose. Fragrant water lily or another water lily, a native water lily, or water willow. Both of it fairly easy to control with some fairly inexpensive herbicides like 2,4-D or glyphosate. Fairly easy to control. So I can keep control of those if I decide to add those. So that's the first element. Don't bring them in under prevention. So what's the next one? Well, maintaining deep edges to the pond. Remember that to have these plants grow, sunlight has to reach the bottom of the pond so that those small plants, as they start to grow, provide sunlight so that they can grow up to the surface. So if you have steep edges, then you're going to prevent a lot of areas where weeds can grow. Also, if you fertilize ponds, that interacts with those steep edges to help shade out weeds as well. Livestock should be fenced out of most of the pond. Now, remember, I said that livestock watering is one of the second most common use of ponds. I'm not saying don't allow livestock to use the water, but just limit where they can use it, rather than giving them general access where they can break down the banks quite a bit. So this is what I'm talking about. These are typical slopes of pond edges that we would recommend. And we would focus on that 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 slope along the edge of the pond. So a 2-to-1 slope would mean for every 2 feet out from the pond edge, it would drop a foot. And 3-to-1, every 3 feet out would drop a foot. That 4-to-1 slope has been used for sometimes some of the banks and the downhill, the dry sides of dams, because that's mowable. That's easily mowable. So that gets pretty expensive though, because that is a lot of soil to move. So usually somewhere between 3-to-1 and 4-to-1 slopes is what we're looking for on those dry faces. But in the inside of the pond, 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 slopes. That's what we're looking at. Now, that, like I said, interacts well if you decide you want to fertilize a pond. So you need to decide, though, fertilization has a lot of other effects, and not everyone should fertilize their pond. So you want to look at some of the pros and cons of fertilization. If you fertilize a pond, it will support a lot more fish than a non-fertilized pond. In areas where there's low fertility, like we are here at Auburn, so a very low fertility soils here. And if you interacting with those slopes, if you can fertilize the pond enough to keep the water green enough, and that's another problem, most people don't necessarily want a pond that green, it will help to shade out the weeds. So to do that fertilization, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about fertilization, but you begin that fertilization in the early spring and fertilize until the water clarity that's measured with a Secchi disc like this here, that you can lower it into the water until that disc, that black and white disc, disappears. And you want that to disappear between 18 and 24 inches. Now that's pretty green. And again, that's the reason why a lot of people choose not to fertilize. and then only fertilize when it gets clearer than that throughout the year. And you have to maintain that year to year and certainly throughout the year. Okay. But there's some negatives to fertilization. I've already hinted at some of these. So if you're going to have that much more fish, you're going to need to harvest a lot more fish to keep that pond in balance and keep the bass growing well and the bluegills growing well if it's a bass bluegill pond. And a fertilized pond requires 20 to 25 pounds of bass be harvested per acre per year from the pond. Well, that ends up being quite a few fish if you've got a pond that's 5 or 6 acres or 10 acres in size. So keep in mind, if you're not able to do that, we recommend not fertilizing the pond. Um, okay. And if you do fertilization improperly, you can cause weed problems. If you start to fertilize after the weeds are established, you're just going to fertilize the weeds. So definitely you want to work with and decide, you start your fertilization before the weeds become a problem to shade them out and prevent them. Okay, and of course, expense is the other reason that I might not want to fertilize a pond as everything's getting more expensive. Okay, is there another way that we can shade things out without fertilizers? Well, pond colorants, and you've all seen these in the ornamental ponds at some of the big parks and things. They can be effective, but they're kind of non-natural looking, but they can be effective. They can be used before you typically, even if you decide to fertilize, before you can fertilize in the spring, because the water doesn't have to be warm for these. So if you're starting to get some early weed growth, you could use them then as a one-time thing. But understand that colorants have to be maintained just like fertilizers, and so these can end up being quite a bit quite expensive as well. So it requires a lot of applications. They do reduce fish production in the pond, and they can lower oxygen levels because they're shading out the good algae that are producing oxygen, just like they're shading out the bad things that we don't want in the pond. Okay. So that brings us through, prevention, and this grades into biological control. I'm not going to go through all these. I'm going to focus on the biological control that we use most, and that's grass carp or the white Amur. Okay. Grass carp are native to Asia, and they were brought to the United States in 1963 by actually Auburn University and Arkansas Pine Bluff were the two places that brought them to the United States. We wouldn't do this today because this is an invasive species that has actually caused quite a bit of problems in the Midwest of North America. So we certainly wouldn't want to cause further problems. In Alabama, we can still stock these as fertile grass carp in our ponds because they will not reproduce in those systems, and they will not and that we've never seen reproduction in our rivers and streams in Alabama. That's because our rivers and streams are dammed. These animals need about 100 miles of uninterrupted flow for the eggs to develop. So you'll never see them reproducing in a pond, and because all our major rivers are dammed, we don't see effective reproduction in Alabama. Now, surrounding states, that's a different story. Most of the states around Alabama greatly restrict the stocking of grass carp. Florida, you have to have permits. In Georgia, the only fish that you can stock have to be sterile. And similarly in the other states around Alabama. Now, I mentioned that they control soft-stemmed. They don't control everything, okay? If you look here, the mouth of a grass carp has no teeth. So they're not able to take a bite out of a stiff plant like a cattail or a water lily. They have to be able to draw that plant into the mouth and back into what's called a pharyngeal mill back here in the throat of the animal. So that's what they're going to be able to feed on mostly. Also, they can't feed on things that are too small, like watermeal or even some small duckweed, because it'll just go right out the gills and they're not able to retain it to feed on it. So, I've said that we haven't had effective reproduction outside the pond. But we also, that doesn't mean we don't care if they leave. We want to keep them in our ponds because they're expensive. A grass carp now, $7 to $10, somewhere in that ballpark, is what you're going to pay for a 8 to 10 inch grass carp or 8 to 12 inch grass carp for stocking in a pond. So it can add up when you've got a large pond and you're trying to stock that pond. So keeping them in the pond is important. A grass carp barrier across a over the side spillway is important. And you can see this is an example of one here, made with rebar, spaced about an inch to an inch and a half apart. They're horizontal because that keeps it sort of as a self-cleaning mechanism in the pond. And you don't have to wash it or scrub it off as much, but you still have to do that some. So how do we stock them? What is the stocking rate? In a new pond, we'd recommend about 5 per acre for small ponds, less than 5 acres in size. Anything over that in size, with 2 to 3 per acre. Those large ponds have a lot of open water where you really don't have a lot of weed problems. So we don't need to overstock the pond with grass carp. And then beyond that, we stock based on the per acres of weed that have been developed into the pond. So if weeds start to become a problem, and we have a publication on that website that can guide you in terms of how many grass carp per acre of weed that you need to stock. Now, really resistant forms like filamentous algae, grass carp typically don't like to eat those, may require very high rates of grass carp stocking to really get those under control. And then over time, you're going to need to restock those grass carp. Some are going to die. And the other thing is they become large and become less effective at weed control. When they exceed about 15 to 20 pounds in size, their feeding rate drops dramatically, and they're just not that effective at weed control. So, and again, just to remind you, grass carp will not reproduce in ponds, and in Georgia, only stock sterile triploid fish. Okay. When you replace those fish, and we often get this, I often get people look at me like I've got 3 heads when I say this. But grass carp are an excellent eating fish, especially if you harvest them in the spring. So you can take them out of your pond, but don't necessarily throw them away before at least trying them. You can cook them on the grill. We have some little recipes on how to cook them. But basically, Italian salad dressing as a short marinade, and then put them on the grill. Remember that grass carp are one of the top 4 aquaculture species in the world, and they're primarily raised for not for weed control, but for food, primarily in Asia. So these are an excellent eating fish. They are quite bony, but when they're this size, when they're a big fish that you're removing, you can just break that meat directly off those big bones without a problem. So just a thought. So that brings us, and again, there are some other biological controls for weeds. I'll touch on one toward the end when I talk about alligator weed. So there's some insects and things like that that can be used. Unfortunately, they're just not commonly available to most pond owners. We used to have a program to get some, but now we're just limited of what we can do with those other biological controls, at least for the common pond owner. So that brings us to herbicide control. And again, keep in mind, all these different approaches can be used and should be used together. So you can use an herbicide, follow that with grass carp, and you've got a combined control, and you're not constantly having to apply herbicides. But herbicides are our kind of last resort for weed control. If the prevention didn't work, the biological control isn't working well, or it's inappropriate, then chemicals are where you need to go. And chemical controls are, the problem is they can be expensive. They may be only short term in terms of their control, and they can have toxic effects on the fish, either directly, in other words, directly toxic, or indirectly by causing oxygen depletions on the fish and other animals in the pond, and in fact, you have to be careful with some of them in terms of your application. Generally not a problem for people in terms of what goes on in the pond, but as you're applying them, we have to be careful. None of the herbicides that I'm going to mention today are restricted use. In fact, we don't have any restricted use herbicides for pond use. So they're not restricted use. You don't have to have a special permit to use them. And they're generally very, very safe for use. Okay, so the two big types of herbicides that we use in terms of the way they function are contact herbicides, and those are the ones that aren't translocated through the plant. They just kill what they touch. And some examples are like chelated coppers for algae. Diquat is one of the typical active ingredients. Carfentrazone is another, and flumioxazin. And those are the ones that I recommend the most. That are out there. Actually, I should have added one more, Aquathol. Very rarely do I recommend those. These are some of our older ones that are less expensive and work generally for most of the plants that we need to use them on. We have to be very careful with contact herbicides because they work very, very quickly. In fact, you can sometimes see effects within hours after applying them. But because of that, all that decomposing plant material can cause oxygen depletion. So you want to be very, very careful how you use them. Systemic herbicides are the ones that translocate through the entire plant and kill the plant throughout its whole system. Okay. And those include fluoridone, which Sonar is a brand name, 2,4-D, glyphosate, triclopyr, imazapyr, and procelacor. Now, those are 95% of the ones that I recommend. There are occasional specialties on some others, but these are the ones that we recommend most often. When possible, I always prefer to use systemic herbicides because they kill the plant entirely, all the way back into the root if it's a rooted plant. So rather than just what they touch. So that's always, and they also kill more slowly. So you get less of this problem of oxygen depletions. So I always opt for systemic if possible. Now, a reminder here before we move forward, when you're using chemicals, any chemical, make sure that you follow the label on that chemical. And so the label is the law, and that's quite literal. So it's federal law. And so follow those precisely. Follow the label instructions precisely. All your necessary information should be there on the label. Its toxicity, its application rate, what protection you need to wear, and the removal time. How long before you can go back or eat the fish or allow your livestock to use the water, all those kinds of things will be there on the label. Never advise someone to use a chemical in a way other than indicated by the label. So just you can talk to a professional. Sometimes professionals have some leeway there, depending. So if a particular plant isn't listed, but it's reasonable to apply it, then that's fine. But we want to be very careful not to go off label. Going off label exposes anyone that makes that recommendation to liability. If you cause a problem, even if you really weren't the cause of that problem, but if a problem occurs after the use and you've told someone to use that inappropriately, you could be liable for those damages. And then always use the recommended rates that are on the label. They're there for a reason. It turns out that that's often the most effective rate to kill the plant. Adding more won't necessarily be more effective. And in fact, it may be less effective in killing the plant. Adjuvants. So those are the other additives that we add to the mix to make the herbicide more effective. And so the first is a good non-ionic surfactant that sticks the herbicide to the plant. And these would be for plants that are growing through the surface, that are have aerial parts, leaves and things above the surface of the water or on the surface of the water. And remember that aquatic plants have a very waxy coating to their leaves. So you want to get through that and stick that herbicide well to the plant. And then sinkers are an excellent addition for liquid herbicides that you want to sink to the bottom of the pond where they can be effective on things growing on the bottom. So it's a thickening agent. You'd be very careful, follow that label instructions on how to mix them in. Don't add too much because you won't be able to inject the material into your pond. So good thickening agents, and there are a few brands available. So let's talk about applying those herbicides. How do we apply them correctly? Well, there's really three major approaches. There are a couple that are by area, so surface aerial applications, subsurface aerial applications, so per acre rates, and then volumetric. So we only have a couple of herbicides that are what we would call pour-in. That's where you're treating the whole volume of the pond. Okay, so if we're treating for aerial, we need to calculate the areas. And the best way now in this day and age is to use digital measures. And there are some inexpensive little apps that will go right on your phone. I use GeoMeasure, but there's lots of others that allow you to take a digital image, a satellite image, and estimate the size of the pond. You don't have to be super precise with these or super accurate with these, but you get an approximate area. But you can also, one of the good things is that, by looking at your pond, seeing where the weeds are, you can trace out areas and estimate the area of the weeds. So that can help you with your applications and stocking rates of grass carp and that kind of thing. Remember that if you're applying herbicides to surface growing, that some weeds need to have that herbicide applied directly to their vegetative parts. And there are just some herbicides that will not be effective if you apply them underwater. For example, glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, although never use Roundup except one type of Roundup that you can use in ponds. But those herbicides have to be applied to the leaves. So be careful with what you're applying, that it's applied correctly for some herbicides. This is what we'd like to see if we're using a sprayer, the type of spray pattern that we would like to see. So you see over here, this is what we're going for. This is it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but it's best I could do. This is a sort of a bead curtain. It's little droplets that are going out, and that's so I won't get drift and mist blowing around, and I can really direct where that herbicide is going. Occasionally, I might have to reach out beyond, where I can get easily or if I'm applying from shore and I need to reach out pretty far. So I might need to open that up and apply a stream. But generally, I want this bead curtain. Here's what I don't want. Oops, went the wrong way. Sorry. I don't want that. I don't want a mist coming out of that, because now that can blow anywhere and can cause real problems in the application. Okay, I had some questions before we started about using different approach. What's the best, boats versus a novel approach now, which is drone applications of herbicides. This is a airboat, and yes, airboats are used. A lot of our consultants use these, especially on large systems, and that's so that they can get up in areas where other boats wouldn't be that effective. The main value of boats is that it gives you ability to carry large volumes and control that drift a little bit more easily. So when we're doing large reservoirs, treatment of those, then it's going to be primarily, I would guess, the boat applications. But drones have their place, and I do believe that, especially for more smaller systems, that we're probably going to see more consultants using spray drones now for that application. And there's some advantages to spray drones. And that is they're relatively rapid. They require less infrastructure. You don't have to haul a boat, trailer. You don't have to have a launch site. You can literally show up with a truck with a drone in the back and your spray material, and you can go out and spray a pond. So I suspect that we're going to see more and more drone applications for applications. But keep in mind that there's some downsides to drones as well. You're not going to be able to apply effectively a lot of subsurface applications. So this is really for just weeds that grow through the surface or sit on the surface. Now, so there are advantages for boat application. It allows for large volumes, less aerial drift, wind is less of a problem, and if you're going to do subsurface applications, those pretty much have to be done from a boat. Plus, fewer permitting issues and less technical training for the use of a boat for application. So let's talk about that subsurface application, bottom application. And that's basically two approaches. One is to inject the herbicide at depth with weighted hoses or with a sinker drift control agent is the first one. So this is an example here, and that instructions on how to build a sinking hose sinker application is available through the through Florida's extension system. That's the link right there on the screen, and here's the citation for that. So it doesn't have to be a big airboat. You can inject underneath the surface in a small pond with a sprayer where you basically just stick the spray nozzle below the surface, or a weighted hose, and you can build those weighted hoses yourself. You just want to keep it out of the sediment. And the other approach is to use sinking granules. So granular applications are quite effective at reaching things on the bottom. The downside is the granules are quite expensive, like multiple times the cost of sinking liquids. So here's a couple of different granular applicators. And here's one that's based on a leaf blower attachment that are available for the home consumer. Now, volume-based, we only have a couple, fluoridone and flumioxazin, that can be applied as a volume application. So pretty limited. So you have to estimate the volume, and basically you have to go out across the pond, use a grid system to determine the volume of your pond, or just the area, and you pretty much guess that your pond is between 6 and 8 feet average depth and multiply, and that will give you probably a pretty close estimate. What about mechanical control? Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because basically mechanical control is both expensive and not that effective. So this is the mechanical control up on TVA lakes, a big mower system, but we now have smaller ones of these that are developed for ponds. And so there are some consultants out that are using mowing systems. Understand that some of these subsurface plants grow very rapidly. Hydrilla and milfoil can grow inches per day. So, effectively keeping them mowed is a problem. Barrier methods where you put down barrier around your swimming area or around your dock can be effective, but keep in mind that those will last for a period of time. You're basically putting woven landscaping fabric down with pea gravel over it. To control any plant, you need to be able to identify it first. So you have to get good identification. And that involves, most time for us today, sending an image to somebody like me or another consultant that can tell you what those plants are. And we're pretty, I get a good picture. I can usually identify the plant. So you need to have all different aspects of the plant shown, leaves, blooms, if there's seed heads, that kind of thing, to be able to identify the plant. Something for scale is good. A clump of weeds on the end of a rake is just not helpful, or just showing them growing in the pond often isn't helpful. You can include those pictures because we can send multiple pictures, but what we really need are these close-up pictures, and the closer the better to get the leaf structure and help us understand it. So if you're going to provide the weeds, then do the same thing. Collect all parts. If you insist on mailing it, you can wrap it in a moist paper towel and place it in an unsealed plastic bag and mail it. Ideally, you just bring the plant to the person you want to identify the weed. Okay, I'm going to run through quickly a few of our more problematic weeds. And this is just a smattering of the ones that I get a lot of calls about. It's by no way. I mean, the hundreds of different, well, dozens of different weed species that we deal with. But this is just some of the ones I get a lot of calls about. Watermeal is one of the real problems. This is the world's smallest flowering plant. It is each one of those little, it's not algae, that's each one of those little specks is an individual plant. They do create a seed, and that seed drops into the sediment, which then can resprout and come back the next year, unfortunately. So watermeal is a real toughie to control. Grass carp will not control it because it goes right through their gills. So you're restricted to using chemicals to control this. So what do we recommend? Fluoridone is very expensive, over $1,000 per acre to control. We are talking about small ponds here, 2 acres or less. And so there is so that's very expensive. A lot of people just balk at using that. Flumioxazin, which is brand names Clipper and others, works quite well as well. But it's not quite as good as Fluoridone, but it's a lot less expensive, like just a few $100s per acre. It is a really difficult weed to control. Tilapia can be used, but in limited conditions. The next one is giant salvinia. This is an invasive plant, actually fern, that's been around for a long time, but it's just currently becoming a serious problem in Alabama. It's currently invading West Alabama. It's very hard to control. It requires tank mixes of diquat and glyphosate or flumioxazin and glyphosate and a good surfactant, and treat them before it becomes a thick mat. The mat on this can be so thick that you can throw a cinder block out on the top and it won't go through. Now, when that happens, there's no oxygen underneath that, so it can cause fish kills as well. Usually requires multiple applications to get this under control. If you look at a close-up of the leaf, you'll see little hairs like this on the surface of the leaf that are basket-shaped. There are two species of salvinia, the common salvinia, which is less problematic, and in that case, the little tips of those don't come back together, they sprangle out. So that's how you can tell if you've got giant salvinia. Southern naiad. Southern naiad is a very common plant. Now, this is a native, but it is a nuisance and it can become a real problem. But grass carp control this quite well. So again, if you get on top of this early and have some grass carp, they'll probably prevent it from becoming a real problem. If not, diquat or flumioxazin, the clipper, are good choices to knock this plant back and then have grass carp to prevent it from coming back. Water milfoil. Water milfoil, there are several that are invasive. The Eurasian water milfoil across the United States is causing all kinds of problems, has over the years. They are often sold in ornamentals as oxygenating plants, but they're really just a pain. There's some suggestion that grass carp won't control this. That's not true. You can stock grass carp, but it just takes a while. They strip off the little leaves and things and control this. 2,4-D is an excellent choice. Diquat and aquathol are also good choices for control of water milfoil. Alligator weed is an invasive plant, and this one came in through the Port of Mobile. It's a South American plant, and you can always tell if you've got alligator weed. There's a couple other plants that look fairly similar, but if you look and it's got this little clover white leaf, flower, and if you break the stem and it's hollow, then you know you've got alligator weed. You have to be careful because if you break this plant up, this is one where mechanical control actually would cause you more problems than it solves. If you try and rake this out or cut this up, you're going to break this plant into a bunch of different parts. And each one of these little nodes can then go off and reroot and spread the plant around. So how do we control it? Well, this is one where, again, I didn't cover the alligator weed flea beetle. We used to have a program where we could get those from the Army Corps of Engineers. That no longer exists, unfortunately, because alligator weed flea beetles are very effective at maybe not eliminating the plant, but reducing it dramatically so that the herbicides, you don't have to use as much herbicide. Triclopyr is probably the herbicide of choice here with a good surfactant. If you're not going to use that, then you can use granular 2,4-D with some other with a top coating of glyphosate. Water shield is another one of these really problematic native plants. You can always tell if you've got water shield. You can see the size of the leaf there. But if the stem comes out of the petiole, actually, it comes right out of the middle of the back of the leaf, then that's water shield. It's quite difficult to control. 2,4-D or triclopyr granules, followed by glyphosate with a surfactant, also imazapyr, flumioxin, and a recent addition to our arsenal, Procelicor, is an excellent use for water shield. The only downside is that it is currently under license and protection, patent protection, and is only available through one company. And you cannot buy this and just apply it yourself. They only allow it to be applied through their approved applicators and trained applicators. So that's unfortunate, but it's an excellent choice for this. It is a difficult weed to control. Okay, the water lilies, and I think I'll end with this, water lilies and so fragrant water lilies or yellow water lilies. 2,4-D is an excellent choice, especially the granules. Glyphosate and triclopyr are also good choices. Make sure to use a good surfactant to control these. Again, these are the ones that you kind of put out for ornamentals, but you don't want them to cover the entire pond as we see, or at least all the whole edge of the pond, like this pond here. They also attract a lot of unwanted wildlife. Their roots and rhizomes are starchy, and beavers like them a lot. Oh, I forgot the algae. Of course, algae are usually controlled with copper compounds. When you get surface blooms like this, they can really be a problem, and they can be toxic to dogs and even cattle and things. So when you get a surface bloom like this in late summer, we don't recommend allowing access to those animals. Filamentous algae are the ones we hear the most about, and I get the most calls about, and probably the worst is Lingbia. It's very hard to control. So we have to use high concentrations of copper. Now, copper has its drawbacks. And in fact, we have to be very careful because copper compounds can be directly toxic to fish at low alkalinity. So if you have alkalinity less than 50 parts per million, then be careful. Copper can also cause oxygen depletions because most of the oxygen in the pond comes from our good algae in the pond. And if you put enough copper out there to kill some, you're going to kill some of your good algae. So I always recommend contacting a professional before treating the algae with copper to make sure that you don't cause these other problems, and getting a test for your alkalinity first. So what are our overall worst weed control errors that I see being made? Well, one is inconsistent fertilization. So we decide to fertilize, and that can be positive for weed control, but we add fertility after the weeds have gotten started, and now we just cause a real headache. Not having any grass carp as a preventative. Not identifying your plant, and so you use the wrong herbicide, or you use it in the wrong way, or try to use grass carp, and grass carp really won't work. That's a real problem. So always identify your plant. And then using copper sulfate, as I just mentioned, if you don't get that checked and understood, you could actually cause a big fish kill. And so you don't want to have that. And not controlling the weeds until they become a severe problem. If you control it when you have a small patch, it's a lot less costly, and you can control it with maybe some less invasive approaches than trying to control it once it becomes a severe problem. So remember, prevention is worth an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That adage is great for this situation. Biological control is your next best option. It's the less expensive approach. If we can use some of the insects, great. Grass carp, where legal and where appropriate, are a good choice for an overall background control. And then herbicides, and treat early before the plant takes over the pond. And with that, I'll wrap it up, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions. Let me stop share.
Oh, you don't, could you pause really quick before you stop sharing?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I can put it back.
We have a handful of questions, so I'll try to
Sure.
be quick. But there is somebody that wanted you to go back to the water shield slide
Okay.
so they
Okay.
could.
Hold on just a second. I'll pull it back up.
Okay. Um, but we'll come back to those questions. We had two before that. So one question is, what is the life expectancy of grass carp?
Okay, grass carp can live 20, 25 years, but their effective life history and a life in a pond is probably only a few years. So, depending on how much vegetation they're eating. So, it's more dependent on size than age, but definitely you can have grass carp living in your pond 10, 15 years easily. And then sometimes can extend up over 20.
Okay. And then our next question is, does adding oxygen via fountains help control algae? Their pond size is around 75 by
It,
75 feet.
it, there are two values to having fountains or any kind of aerator in a pond. One is it's an insurance policy. So you're talking about algae. Well, I'm just sorry, I'm scrolling back to that. Let me get back to that. Let me get back to that. So I'll quit moving while I'm trying to talk. Um,
We're multitasking.
yeah. Almost there. There we go. Okay, we'll come back to that then in a minute, but let's get back to the fountains. So there are two values. First is for oxygenation. So if you have, and you can have an oxygen depletion for a lot of reasons. It's not just due to algae or due to herbicide application or what have you. So having any kind of an aerator is a insurance policy against having an oxygen depletion. And we get those in the spring, and sometimes even the very best managed pond will have what we call an algal bloom die-off, and that can cause an oxygen depletion in the pond. So, and then turnover events later in the year. So that's the number one value of having a fountain besides aesthetics, fountain or a aerator in the pond. It will prevent those. Now the question becomes, and sometimes I see this on some of the websites where they're selling aerators, is how it will eliminate algae problems. Well, no, it really doesn't. What it does do is tend to break up those surface blooms, and it will push them to the sides of the pond. So might make them a little easier to treat because they're pushed up into little areas of the pond. It leaves more open area so that you get less of these shading problems where you get clumps on the surface, and it tends to break those up. Once the algae has begun to die, especially those filamentous algae in the spring, and they're forming those ugly mats on the surface, those are much, at that point, those algae are primarily dying at that point. And so having extra aeration helps to prevent oxygen depletion, but also helps break down those dying, decomposing mats. But do they prevent algae problems? And the answer is no, they do not.
Okay, thank you. And then on the water shield,
Yeah,
someone said that they had sterilized Russian carp, but they did not eat the water shield. Is that
that's
something you see typically?
yes, that's absolutely correct. And I pulled up exactly the right picture to show you why. If you look at the back side of that leaf and you look at that stem, you see it's sort of shiny.
They mentioned maybe because it was waxy.
Well, yeah, it's not waxy, it's snotty.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
It's got a mucilage kind of coating on the back, a real gelatinous, slick coating. And so the grass carp just have a really hard time getting a hold of that. And it's probably somewhat distasteful on top of that. So they don't do a good job of controlling water shield once the water shield is well established. Now, when you kill back water shield using an herbicide, then having grass carp present will slow down it coming back because the small young stems, when they pop through the bottom, these grass carp can eat those. So we will see some eating, but it's they you once you establish water shield, the grass carp can't really control it.
Okay.
I do want to give a quick warning because that reminds me, if you are thinking about putting out a plant in your pond or putting out tubs of plants in ponds like water lilies, and you've got grass carp, make sure you protect those young plants from the grass carp. Even though they don't typically control water lilies either, they will rip them out of those pots. And so that could be an expensive lesson to learn. So make sure that you put some chicken wire or something around those. Keep the until they become well established. Keep the grass carp from ripping them up if you want to establish some for ornamental purposes.
Okay, and we had more comments about the water shield. They said they've used herbicide treatment for water shield and it kills the initial growth but needs yearly treatment.
Yeah,
And they worry
that's
about adding the chemicals.
well, it doesn't cause a. I would not worry about the annual treatment or adding more and more chemical to the pond in terms of causing any kind of environmental damage or having problems with your fish or moving up the food chain and becoming concentrated in the fish or anything like that. These herbicides are very well tested. And again, as long as you follow the label instructions on the concentrations and the rate of application and how often you can apply them, that's not going to be an issue. So I wouldn't worry about that. But yes, these plants have pretty extensive root systems, and usually after you treat them a couple of times, you do tend to reduce them dramatically. But they will tend to want to come back on you, and they also produce seeds. So there's going to be seeds in the bottom, and those are going to sprout back. So usually after the first treatment or two, you will see less of it coming back, and you'll have to just spot treat. But yeah, it's going to take a while. You probably will never completely eliminate something like water shield.
Can you go to the next slide, please, to show which chemicals you recommended? Yes, there. And they mentioned they said we have a cute bladder snail, also called pole snail, eating the leaves of the watershed. Is that something you've seen before?
I've seen a variety of things that eat water shield, and you will often see almost like if you've ever seen a plant that has a little caterpillar or something that makes a little track through the leaf. There's we have a couple of caterpillars, little caterpillars that are little moths that lay their eggs on this plant. So you will see that. It's just not enough to really control the plant. So, but you definitely, there's several things that eat water shield.
Okay. And then we had a question. If I remember correctly, grass carp don't reproduce easily, so why would grass carp be frowned upon if they're so effective and sterilized?
If they're sterilized, okay, then the answer is they're generally not significant laws against their use. But the big law is that they are sterile, that they have to be sterile. Now, here in Alabama, that's not a requirement, but in, like I said, Georgia, they are quite effective, but they have to be ensured that those animals are sterile. And a shipper or a stocker that when they bring fish across state lines, they have to have a certificate that says that all the fish on their truck are sterile. Now, how they test those animals by doing a subsample of fish from the tank. They can do a blood test, and based on the blood test, they can determine whether they're triploid sterile grass carp. And so yes, but it's about that sterile because the fish are going to get out of the pond. Here in Alabama, I mean, we haven't stocked grass carp in public waters in a long time, but we still get them in our big reservoirs, and that's because they get out of people's farm ponds. We have a high water event, and they go downstream. They are attracted to flow, and so they will get out and could cause problems if they reproduce in our rivers. We've been fortunate in Alabama that they haven't, but other states certainly don't want to take that risk. So that's why they've required that they be sterile.
Thank you. And then we had someone who raised their hand to ask their question. So
Okay.
also I want to say I know we're a little past one. So thank you all for joining. If you need to hop off, completely understand. We'll go ahead and send out a link afterwards. But if you do have questions and want to stay on, Rusty, do you have time to
Oh
answer a
yeah,
few
oh
more?
yeah. Just
Okay. All
I'll
right.
work.
Well, Herbie raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute him. And if you want to ask your question, go ahead. Um, oh, he typed it. So, what's the difference between aquatic use glyphosate and regular glyphosate?
Ah, that's a very good question because it really highlights what you can use and what you can't. The and by the way, because of all the lawsuits and things associated, and again, that's really can't get into that except to say that if you look at the literature, I can say this, I'm comfortable that there really isn't a serious problem with the use of glyphosate in terms of human health issues. But that's a legal issue that I'll leave to others. But so it's not the glyphosate. The glyphosate molecule, that active ingredient, is not the issue aquatic versus terrestrial. Okay, the Roundup and some of the other terrestrial formulations of glyphosate often have a surfactant built into them or added to that mixture that makes them very effective on weeds in on land applications. It's a fatty acid surfactant with Roundup. That's really was the magic that made Roundup so effective. Was that fatty acid surfactant? The glyphosate had been around for a while, but adding that really made it effective. But it's a fatty acid surfactant that is toxic to aquatic animals. So if you spray it directly in water, those that surfactant, it's a soap kind of thing, can damage things like any of the gills of fishes or the amphibian skin, that kind of thing. Really potentially causes some issues. So definitely don't, a little bit of drift, you're up on the bank and a little drifts into your pond. It's not going to kill everything, but it's not something you want to apply directly to plants growing over water. So this glyphosate that was approved for aquatic use typically has no surfactant in it, and you have to add your own. So then you add a surfactant that's safe to use in water. So, and the other reason, sometimes you'll look on the store shelf and it will still be a pure glyphosate, but it won't be approved for aquatic use. And you say, well, that should be approved. Well, the reason is that the company has not gone through the process of having it approved and tested. So just use the stuff that the label says can be used for aquatic use. And there's a lot of them out there now. It used to be only one or two, and then it was still pretty expensive. Now you can order them online, and there's dozens of different generic aquatic approved glyphosates. Unfortunately, you can't buy even glyphosate for terrestrial use anymore at the local big box store. So.
Well, thank you. And then if you could speak a little bit about duckweed control.
Yeah, duckweed is a real problem, and I didn't include that because I included the water meal and kind of think of it similar to the problems with water meal. Duckweed can cover the surface of a pond and cause oxygen depletion. Duckweed, and there's multiple species, including some invasive duckweeds that have come into the southeast. They grow really rapidly, and that's the reason that they can cover the entire surface of the pond. Contact herbicides work the best for control of those as well. You can use 2,4-D, but frankly, you're going to use contact herbicides. Dicot is somewhat effective especially if you can trap that. It gets blown up into one side of the pond and you can really spray it there. You're probably going to have to spray it multiple times. Flumioxazin is a better choice, which is Clipper, Flumigard, Propeller, excellent choice for the control of duckweed. So that's what I would use. And then if you want to go with a systemic, then the more expensive Sonar or Avast, the Fluoridone is a very effective. Fluoridone's good. It's a good general control. Also, keep in mind anytime you're using these, though, be careful that that it's compatible with your other uses of the pond. If you're using irrigation issues, if you're using any of these herbicides, make sure that you're not going to irrigate a plant that you don't want hurt with that water. So be careful with those. And sonar is one of those you have to be a little careful with.
Okay, thanks. And then I think we have one last question. Do you know, can we use grass carp in Virginia?
I don't know the answer to that question, unfortunately. I believe so. I believe they have to be sterile, but I would contact your local DNR. They will have those regulations for you. So that's where I would go to find out. So I'm not certain about Virginia, whether or not you can use a grass carp. I think so, but I wouldn't want to depend on my my answer for that.
Alrighty. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have. Thank you all for joining today. Thank you so much, Rusty. This was great, very informative. Like I said, I'll send out a link to everyone with Rusty's contact information and a link to the recording. Um, oh, we have one last question. If the
Sure.
difference between Russian and grass carp.
It's just different names. We
Okay.
the grass carp is a real common name here. I hear them called white Moors all the time. And I'm assuming, actually, I hadn't heard them called Russian carp, but they are an Asian species. They're native to the Amur River, and I do believe that that is partly in Russia and partly in China. So, but I could be wrong about that. But they are a Asian carp species. Of course, we have all the other Asian carps now that are causing a lot of headaches in the Mississippi River, the silver carp, big head carps, and unfortunately black carp now showing up as well. And so they have a lot of the same biology as grass carp. They have to have that 100 or a large stretch of open water to reproduce or flowing water to reproduce. And then we have the carp that, and we hear the word carp, the common carp, and they're native to both Asia and Europe. And the common carp is in all our reservoirs now, all our rivers, and they will reproduce in a pond, although generally bass keep them under control. And They dig up the bottom. That grass carp don't. They don't cause that problem. They don't dig up the bottom, but the common carp do. So we don't. That's not something we'd want in a pond except under specialized situations. But it's an invasive. The common carp's invasive, and was brought in the early 1800s. And people realized they'd made a horrible mistake within 10 years after bringing them to the United States.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all for joining. I hope you'll have a great day, and thank you so much again, Rusty. I hope you
Yeah.
have a good day as well.
Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.
All right. Bye, y'all.